Okay, we are. The webinar has started. We are going to, here's our. Welcome everyone. We are going to just give folks a couple minutes to log on and then we will get started. We're so excited to have this conversation today. Okay, so thank you. So many people were just chomping at the bit. So we are ready to go. Good afternoon, depending on where you are here on the East Coast. I was just saying our panel, I'm about to introduce everyone. We have a true cross-country experience today. So good morning or afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. I am excited to moderate this discussion of what I think all of us on this panel would agree is one of the most pressing issues facing K-12 education in the US today, which is how to sustain and scale the impactful tutoring programs that are taking place in schools across the country. Our panel today literally spans the country. And importantly, it represents schools and tutoring providers that we here at FutureEd. I'm Liz Cohen, Policy Director of FutureEd, profiled in our recent report called Learning Curve: Lessons from the Tutoring Revolution in Public Education. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, we will drop a link in the chat. So starting in the West, we have Susanna Loeb, professor at Stanford University and the founder and executive director of the National Student Support Accelerator and our partner in the Learning Curve report. Then we have Katie Hooten, based in Phoenix, Arizona, representing the Mountain Time Zone, founder, executive director of Teach for America's Ignite Tutoring Fellowship Program. We have Zenovia Crier, the principal of Lyndon B. Johnson Elementary School in Odessa, Texas. That's Central Time. And Michael Duffy is the founder and president of the Go Foundation, which supports the work of 9 Great Oaks charter school campuses across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, as well as partnerships with DC Public Schools and some other districts as well. And I am coming to you live from Washington, DC. Can't you tell by the paneling behind me that I am in our nation's capital? Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. A few housekeeping pieces. The chat is not open, but we do have the Q&A open. Please send us your questions. We have a lot to share with you all today, but we really want this to be about what you're wondering, what you're thinking about, what you're struggling with. If we all believe that this is so important, then we all have to have this conversation together. We will absolutely be using your questions as we continue the conversation. To my panelists, I would say I'm going to be asking you questions, but again, we want to all be talking. So jump in and say what it is that you think we need to say. So one of our key findings from the work we've been doing is that we need to focus on what the evidence says is high quality tutoring, but not all tutoring is created equal. So I want to start by spending a minute framing and defining exactly what we mean by high impact or high dosage tutoring. But I'm not going to do it. I'm going to ask Susanna, as our resident research expert, to walk us through what the evidence has really told us works. You're muted.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz. I'm really happy to be here today and to be able to talk about this. So when I think of high impact tutoring, I think it has 2 driving elements. And the first is that it develops a really close relationship between the student and the tutor that engages and motivates the student. And this is really kind of the secret sauce of good tutoring. The second is that high impact tutoring targets students' individual needs with intensive, high quality instruction. And this is what really accelerates the learning. And in order to get this kind of great combination of relationship-based and personalized instruction, high-impact tutoring programs tend to share a few key elements. So based on a really impressive research-based studying tutoring programs, we've been able to identify 7 common elements of many high-impact tutoring programs, which we've put into a framework for high-impact tutoring, which can be used really across grade levels and content areas. So here are the 7 elements. So First, the program needs to be grounded in equity in order to have the kind of effects that we want to see. And this means ensuring that the students who need it most have access to it. And it means really that the tutors lead sessions with kind of equity at the center of their instruction. So we have equity as kind of a foundational element. Second, the program also ensures student safety. So this means designing a tutoring program in which students and their information are basically safe and protected. These are kind of foundational elements. The third and kind of final foundational element before we get into kind of the key model elements is just that it needs to be run well. It needs to be cohesive with effective leaders who make sure that all of the elements and internal systems work cohesively towards really the program's goals. So you've got these kind of foundations of good programs, these equity, safety, and cohesion. And then in addition, high impact programs tend to have these 4 model specific elements. And these are really important to think about because it separates some approaches from tutoring from really this high impact tutoring. And the first has to do with the tutor. So lots of people can be great tutors, but the program has to make sure that the tutor is consistent, meaning that the student has the same tutor each time so that they can develop that motivating relationship. The tutor also needs to have the supports they need to be effective as instructors, which also often means initial preparation and coaching. If you're a master teacher, you need less of this, but as a new tutor or a new teacher, you really need that. Second, the instruction, the second element has to do with instruction. So you've got the tutor and then instruction. And it needs to be both high dosage, which means you get a lot of it, at least 3 times a week for a semester, or better yet, a school year. And it needs to be based on high quality instructional materials. So you've got the tutor, you've got instruction. The third element, in addition to these 2, is learning integration. Programs that are during the school day have more consistent attendance, which likely contributes to more effective outcomes. And that's really important. And they also have kind of the benefit of being able to just be part of the instructional program. Finally, the last model specific element is data. Regardless of the source of data, effective tutoring programs use student progress data to tailor their instruction to students. So one of those benefits is that it's not just a broad coverage of all possible material, but it really hones in on what the student needs, and data is an important part of it. So just to sum it up, it's intensive, it's relationship-based, and it's individualized for the student, and that's what high-impact tutoring is. It's not really surprising that this approach is highly effective, but it can be difficult to implement, and we'll I'm sure, talk about how to implement it well, because lots of places are being able to do that.
Everyone, there'll be a quiz later on the 7 elements, so I hope you wrote them all down. But no, that was exactly the kind of grounding I was hoping we could start with as we really take today's conversation to look to the future, right? How do we get this kind of high impact tutoring to even more students? And how do we keep these programs going after federal ESSER dollars expire or run out? And I want to just take a moment and ask everyone to share a little something about why this matters, because before we get into the what and the how, which I know everyone here has so many super interesting and exciting thoughts on, I do think it's important to take a moment to talk about why we should care about this. So I'm going to ask everyone to share one quick thought about why tutoring matters now and in the future. And I really want to start, I'm so excited to start with Zenovia. You are a principal of a school that has truly embraced tutoring that I was able to see for myself. So if you could share with us, like, what has tutoring meant for your school?
So right now we're seeing a constant increase in our data in reading and math. We're looking at data almost every day, and we're seeing our students just spike. And it's empowering for the students because they're seeing it as well. And so as far as the relationships, those tutors are there building relationships as if they're almost on our campus. They connect with those students almost daily. And again, we're looking at data. We just saw our recent MAP data. We are at the top of our district with reading MAP, and we're catching up with math and science as well. So our kids are invested. Our parents are also invested as well, because we send them regular emails about, hey, your kid needs to be on campus for this beneficial program. Again, it doesn't take the place of Tier 1 instruction, but this is just another element of what we're using on campus, because again, we have the extra people actually on our campus virtually with those kids. And again, we have a high poverty area. Again, this is offered for students regardless of their background, regardless of their zip code. So again, we're seeing the gains. Our STARS data was double-digit increases from last year. So we're just moving and rocking and rolling. Our kids are very, very happy about these results.
Who wants to go next? Michael, you're off mute.
I would say you asked the question, Liz, why tutoring? For me, it's personal. My family moved a lot when I was in elementary and middle school. By the time I got to 7th grade, my math skills were really terrible. And my parents hired a tutor to work with me in the summer between 7th and 8th grade. And it made the difference between me getting into an algebra class in 8th grade and not, and going from remedial in 7th to algebra in 8th. And that one small change and my success in algebra, and then advanced classes I took in high school, and the doors that opened made a huge impact on my life. And I'm glad that my parents were in a position to be able to hire a tutor. And what can we do for all kids so that they can benefit from that kind of experience? So as Susanna talked about equity and making equity a key consideration, and Zenovia is describing this comprehensive approach, I just wanted to kind of amplify something that Susanna said is the kids who need it most, is that I think we need to take care not to sort of make this just something that's available to the kids who struggle, but that all kids can benefit from this. The kids in the middle, the kids who are at the top end, who are acing their classes. I think every one of them can benefit from that individualized approach that tutoring provides.
And I'll just jump in there because, excuse me, I'm a little under the weather, so bear with me. But that's very connected to what's top of mind for me, right? As Michael described, affluent families have always been able to ensure that their children have access to customized learning and to individualized instruction. And this absolutely, access to high impact tutoring is an equity issue. We also know that students from low income communities have experienced more learning loss during the pandemic, and that recent research is showing that the recovery for this group of students has been slower than their more affluent peers who actually lost less ground during the pandemic. So as a result, students from low income communities are facing an even greater opportunity gap than they were 5 years ago. So, and I would just say, like, given the real and positive evidence that we're seeing from high impact tutoring, all kids should have access to this type of tutoring and instruction during the school day. And yet what we're seeing is that only 10% do. So for me, kids only have one shot at 2nd grade. And I really think that accelerating access to high impact tutoring could be transformational in ensuring that this generation of students can learn, lead, and thrive.
Yeah,
And if I can add, it just aligns to what we're doing on campus. We're the blended model campus. And so it just falls right into place for what we're doing. So it's very impactful, very powerful. And again, like Ms. Hooten said, we want those students who are not able to get those opportunities to get those opportunities. And so that's afforded to them. So just being able to see a kid from whatever background coming to the cafeteria, get on the tutoring, and just engage with another adult that says, I care about you, I want you to be successful. It has just been revolutionary on our campus. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and I think I care about tutoring because we know it works. And I just wanted to emphasize that it's well suited not only to address kind of the COVID learning challenges, but really these long-standing issues that we've had in addressing the needs of students. It's very difficult for a single classroom teacher with many students to really be able to hone in on each student in the way that they need to excel, and this gives us an opportunity. And I think plus it's kind of relationship-based nature has really positive benefits in terms of social emotional well-being and engagement in school and these other things that we really care about for long-run success as well.
I wanted to kind of build on something that Susanna listed in her 7 elements that during the school day as an important component. I think that that's important for 2 reasons. One, practical. if you have something that's after school or on Saturday, the kids who would benefit most from that are the most likely to sort of slip through the cracks. When you think about bus schedules and parent pickup and the logistics of that, it makes it difficult. But as important is the symbolic message that it sends to kids and to the school community. This is important. This is not some marginal thing that we do in the extra time. This is an essential modality of the way that we want kids to learn and that we're going to meet their needs.
I also will say, I mean, just from, I spent last year visiting a lot of places, including Zenovia's schools, other schools in Ector and other places. But Michael, your point you were making earlier about how it's powerful that everyone can benefit from tutoring. But I also think that's important because some of the teachers I spoke to said, when we started tutoring, we were just targeting, you know, our sort of very bottom kids, our, whether you want to call them tier 3 or just our most struggling students. But then those students felt singled out and they knew it was because they were struggling, and then everyone else knew. And they said what really helped flip the switch was when they turned to more students in the class getting tutoring. Then all of a sudden it's some kids are doing enrichment, everyone else is doing tutoring, and now everyone is just kind of buzzing with, oh, this is the thing we do now. And I think that that is such an interesting sort of mind shift. And another reason why what you brought up about how all kids can benefit is actually really important to making sure the one kids we might worry about the most, in fact, benefit. So yeah, and I'll just say, I also think that everyone likes it, right? It's really like, I mean, Zenovia, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit maybe about just the way that the teachers in your school have really embraced this idea of changing the schedule in order to accommodate tutoring, and the ways that they just like it.
Definitely. So we knew coming together that we knew we had to do something different because of COVID. And we had this, we had to catch kids up. So the teachers are like, we want to do this. We're going to push this. So we all got together as a team and said, this is what we value. This is what we're going to do. And we monitor it. We are all in on this monitoring. The teachers are a part of it. They're invested in it. And they let the kids know that this is important. We try to maintain the behavior. And again, when you come into a classroom, you're going to see a teacher at a small group table working with groups of kids. You're going to see an independent group of kids working on projects. You're going to see students doing the tutoring programs and then other digital resources. So it's like a buzzing environment. Like this is their job and they know that they're supposed to do this. So they're all in on it. You can hear them engaging with the tutorers. It's so fun to see because they're like, they know what I need and I'm getting what I need because it's based on data. And so we're in there looking at these kids like, oh, I get it now. They're making the connections. And then when they take the summative examination, they've already said, I've covered this somewhere in my classroom with all these different functionalities going on within the classroom. And our tutoring program is part of that. And it's just, again, a phenomenal thing that we're doing. And I'm just glad that our superintendent, Dr. Murray, is pushing this initiative. He's a progressive thinker. And so he said, this is what we're going to do. This is who we are. And so we've kind of been following that through, but again, amazing. And I know when you came to our campus, you were able to see the buzz with the kids, like they're connecting with these adults who, you know, I'm going to give you what you need. It's like a doctor, you know, they're performing a surgery. This is what you need. This is what we're going to feed to you. We're going to fill in those gaps. So just a phenomenal thing to do for kids.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, what's cool is that all of you guys who are, I mean, Katie, your tutoring program is virtual, but with college students, and Michael and Great Oaks, you're using AmeriCorps fellows in person. And having been to all places that you guys are working in, I've seen that buzz replicated in these different modalities and different environments. But I do want to just turn a little bit to the elephant in the room, which is the funding. A lot of places, Ector County is one, have really dedicated big chunks of their federal ESSER dollars to get these tutoring initiatives off the ground. But Katie and Michael, both of your models have the potential to really be sustainable in the long run by pulling on other available programs and funding streams. So I'd love to hear you guys talk a little bit about how you see the future of tutoring from a funding perspective with work study and AmeriCorps, and also just, you know, how you see districts considering these trade-offs involved.
Yep, absolutely. So, I mean, there are real trade-offs at play, obviously, in figuring out sustainable and long-term funding, especially with ESSER coming to close, although 1 year left, get those contracts in place. You know, for us, as we're thinking about this, and given the outsized impact we're seeing that tutoring can play, again, I think we have the moral imperative to figure this out, right, as, you know, as a community, so that all kids have access during the day. And so for us, fellow stipends, so what we're paying our fellows, which is what we call our tutors, and veteran educators, school-based educators at the school site to ensure learning coherence. Those stipends for those two individuals make up over 50% of our total cost, and will obviously continue to grow as we scale in an effort to reach more students. And so our biggest pathway to sustainability and reducing costs overall is really unlocking federal work study. So we are working towards the world where 50% or more of our fellows' stipends are being paid through federal work study in partnership with colleges and universities. Obviously, this is an arduous task for lots and lots of reasons, which I'm happy to talk more about. But I do believe if we're able to do this, we would be able to dramatically bring down costs while also tapping into federal funding that is really set aside for community service through the federal work study program. So I think there's real wins to this. And that is the biggest thing that we are focused on to ensure sustainability in the long term, and that this is enduring even post ESSER.
I'd
Katie,
say,
oh, go ahead, Michael, and then I'll ask Katie my question.
yeah, I think for us, one of the key, the backbone of our program is the federal AmeriCorps program. So AmeriCorps gives us the resources that we use to pay the living allowances of the people who, Katie, we call them fellows as well, who serve in our program, who give a year of service as a fellow at Go. We also, in order to augment that and get a diverse pool so that our fellows look like the kids they serve, we also provide housing. So that has been really important for us in getting to a place where about 2 out of 3 of our fellows are people of color. And we're working to kind of increase that to get that to be even higher. I think that's one answer to your question, Liz. The other I'd share is, you know, it costs about $22,500 per fellow for a school that wants to place them. And when I was talking to a school leader week before last, when he heard that, he said, that sounds really cheap. Because in his mind, he's thinking about the cost of getting a caring adult in his building who's going to be providing, and what's his alternative to that is quite expensive. So I think that's another way, and it sort of goes to something you and I have talked about, Liz, which is I think we're in the process, and Susanna, I think perhaps what you're all about and what you're doing too with the Accelerator is just creating a new place in the imagination of educators about what staffing in a school looks like, so that maybe we could imagine 10 years from now, every public school has this cadre of people, tutors, who are doing this work with students.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so my questions I'm going to ask just that I want you guys to spend a minute sharing for each of your programs, because I can imagine these are the #1 questions I get asked about your programs. So for Michael, it's how do you figure out how to afford to pay for housing, especially in expensive cities like New York and DC? And for Katie, it's how do you ensure that college students who have never been in a classroom setting and often are not themselves even education students, right? How do you make sure that they know what they're doing?
So for housing, they've got to live and be comfortable living a couple to a bedroom in apartments that have a couple of bedrooms in it. Many of our AmeriCorps members are recent college grads, so that's not too dissimilar to what they're used to. I think we also have older adults who are more settled in their lives, some career changers who are doing this. I talked to one on Friday who's a mom of 3 boys. And for her, she's not living in housing, but we give her the equivalent of what we would spend on an apartment that she can add to her living allowance.
And I'll just speak to again, connecting with investment. When we think about the investment that this is supporting, especially given the folks that we are recruiting actively as fellows, we see that we're making this investment in both is like supporting immediate student success, but we're also building a pipeline for diverse teacher talent. So like Michael, over 55% of our fellows identify as BIPOC. Over 40% identifies coming from a low-income community. We think that really matters. But what we're seeing is that when college students get into real relationship with kids and understand the opportunity and see the impact of their partnership with kids, that it's changing their post-college trajectories. So in fact, 43% of our fellows who were seniors applied to teach as teachers through Teach for America. And they were also 3 times more likely to get in given their experience. So one, just naming that in sustainability and investment, for me, this is both direct and immediate investment that we're making with kids, but also towards building a diverse teacher pipeline, which I think is incredibly important in this time, especially when we're seeing teacher programs down across the country. So I just want to name that. And 2, just like our Teach for America program, where we enlist college graduates of all majors to commit to teaching for two years, training, onboarding, and ongoing learning and development is critical across all of the programs that we do. We are lucky enough to rely on Teach for America's 30-year history in supporting and developing teachers to be effective with students. So when we started, we literally pulled what we did for our new teacher program for our onboarding. And every semester, our fellows are getting 10 hours of new and differentiated onboarding based on how many semesters they have been with us, what content area they're teaching, what grade level they're teaching. And we're really been able to pull on a lot of those. Those are the early years we were just pulling and using. They're now customized specifically for tutors. And we're using a lot of different resources out there. Happy to share more about our onboarding.
Well, I think this is a good moment to bring in our first audience question, which is, will you please discuss the impact of in-person versus online tutors, especially in the aftermath of COVID and the importance of personal contact? Susanna, I think there's been some research that's come out on some of these programs that maybe you could share a little bit and whatever else you've seen. And then Katie, you just spoke with such genuine enthusiasm and excitement about relationships that are in fact developing online. Whereas Michael, we know your fellows are in person. So I'd love to kind of bring into this conversation that question of like, what do we know about in-person versus online? And also what maybe might surprise some of the folks listening today.
I guess I can take a shot at some of that. So I think it's really important to distinguish the kind of online high impact tutoring that we're talking about from computer assisted learning, where kids are online, but they're not in this kind of one-on-one or small group instruction. So the kind of high impact online tutoring that Katie's talking about is somewhat like what we're doing here, where we are really getting to know each other, making these connections. And I think that we've seen that you can develop those relationships online. We've seen positive effects from online programs where a tutor works with 1 or 2 students, let's say, but the tutor is virtual and the student is in school. That's very different from one where the student is working by themselves, even if it's AI driven or if it's got this kind of nice features. I think it's much harder for students to engage in that, but that you can have positive effects in an online setting where it's more one-on-one and you're really getting to talk to the same tutor over a long period of time. That said, I do think it can vary based on lots of other kinds of things. So for example, while we found positive effects in early grades of online tutoring, so even with young kids, it can be effective in kindergarten, it may not be as easy to implement and as effective as if you could get an adult right in school with them. But some schools are able to implement that and some aren't. You can imagine a case, for example, that you want to do tutoring in high school math and you just don't have people to come in and tutor in high school math, and the way to access the tutors with the skills is to go virtually. And that could be true even at the early grades. In order to get the really good tutors and the kinds of programs that provide the supports that tutors need, then going virtual is the right call. So I think it varies a lot across places what the right call will be for them, but we've definitely seen that it can be effective both in person and virtually.
Yeah, and I will say we designed for this, right? So when we set out to build Ignite, we talked with both school leaders who really helped inform the program to ensure there was learning coherence. And we talked to veteran educators, and we heard a lot about accelerating learning there, which is of course critical. When we talked to kids, the number one thing they talked about was relationships, feeling connected, feeling seen, feeling known. They talked a lot about wellness and mental health. And so when we were designing Ignite, we really wanted to make sure we were designing for kids' needs. And that was the number one thing, right? It's one of the reasons why we work with college students. We heard from them actually initially that high school kids were maybe too old. So, but we started with high school kids, right? And the relationships are real, y'all. One of my favorite moments was I was in an elementary school classroom, a third grade classroom, and the student yelled, wait, I need a high five goodbye. And they literally like high five touched the screen. I actually happened to catch that one in action on my camera, so I was able to get it. But I also have been in a classroom where I saw students literally hugging the computer goodbye, right? Like this is like, there's real joy, there's real relationship. And that matters because we know that, feeling a connection and feeling valued is critical to then also being able to learn and grow, right? And we're creating a safe space for kids to both build their confidence, take risks, all of which I think is really critical, and then shows up in core classrooms when they're more participatory, right? Because they're feeling that confidence.
And if I could jump in really quick, I just want to say I agree totally, because we had an incident where a student was feeling down and he expressed some things to one of our tutors, and that tutor emailed me immediately, and I was able to kind of make that connection with the kid based on what that kid told the tutor. So again, saying the relationship is there for those kids and it's a trusting environment. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But for us, the in-person has been critical. Our fellows have 3 responsibilities: to instruct through tutoring, to mentor, which focus on kids' social, emotional sort of needs, and then to develop in the school community. So a lot of our fellows, in addition to the role they play, which is primary through tutorial throughout the day, they also do things like coach the lacrosse team or lead the poetry club or get involved in their community in some other way, or they mentor. And being in person for those other aspects of their fellowship, I think, are critical.
If I can make one more comment, hard to staff areas, West Texas is hard to staff. And so with the tutoring program, we have these adults that are virtually coming into my campus supporting the needs of students. So again, it has a opportunity to be an actual teacher for a student if you cannot staff your campus. So that's just, I want to kind of share that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Zenovia, let's like a moment of real talk here. Like what is it gonna take to keep tutoring at LBJ at the level it's at now? What would it take to expand it? I know it's not, when I was there, you were hoping to expand it maybe to 2nd grade. Like what would it take to get it into every classroom?
Well, right now, again, my superintendent, very progressive thinker, he's pushing this, Dr. Murray. He's on board with it. Right now, we're waiting on the state to issue out funding for our state of Texas, public education. There's something going on where the money is kind of held up, but funding this for kids, just imagine if everyone was able to play in their game equally, and what would you have? And this is a program that provides that opportunity for students that look like me, Black and brown kids. It has to, be funded, and hopefully the adults in the room, I'm talking about the state officials and people who fund, who have those directors for education, do the right thing and say, hey, if we're going to make sure that all of our students across the country is successful, we're going to take care of them. And this is a program funding public education, funding for these opportunities for kids to have this adult. And I can remember growing up, I would have classmates saying, oh, I have tutoring. And that wasn't afforded to me because my parents, she's a teacher and my dad was a longshoreman. So they're making about $40,000 a year. And so again, just imagine how much better my life could have been if I was afforded the opportunity to have something in place like this growing up as a kid.
You said this to me before, but I'm going to tell you what I told you when you and I had this conversation, which is I think you've turned out amazing and your students in school are so lucky to have you, but your point still stands.
Thank you so much.
Susanna, are there districts that you're working with at the National Student Support Accelerator that you think are just being particularly thoughtful about the sustainability question?
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of districts that have kind of already successfully implemented tutoring and have seen the beneficial results and are now kind of working to sustain it. And they're showing us kind of a lot of different options for funding. So some of the options are that the state is putting in money. Some of the options are that they're making use of outside funds like AmeriCorps dollars and work study when they're working with universities. And some have to do with taking the funds they have through title funds, through IDEA, and really using the funds that they have in new ways because they've recognized the benefits of tutoring. And in order to do that, they've really had to have a good data collection and I think Ector County is a really good example of that, where they've had really good data collection that has allowed them to see that it's been effective. And that's really important for kind of changing the resource allocations that they have. So I can think back on some of them. Why don't I start with Ector? They've been using outcome-based contracting, which requires this data collection and assessment of program effects. So they've got this clear evidence. And as we were hearing it, they haven't decided exactly how to sustain tutoring, but I think that the data is helping. And Dr. Murray is the superintendent who's that you mentioned, said something to the something like they can't afford not to do it. So that's his quote, that they really are going to try to figure out how to do it. We've also been seeing other school districts that are doing interesting things. So DCPS, DC Public Schools, is currently working with their state Office of Education to figure out funding. They're trying to build tutoring in as a tier 2 support, so part of their MTSS system, and they're identifying ways of using existing personnel, such as paraeducators, as tutors in the classroom. You could think of kind of reimagining the role of paraeducators in the classroom so that they can be tutors instead of the somewhat more ad hoc roles that they've had up until now. Guilford County Public Schools is one that's often used as an example because they've created a tutoring department and built capacities within the district to sustain tutoring so that it's part of the general operations. And theirs is so interesting because their curriculum's really aligned. Since it's so much part of what they do, they've been able to align the tutoring curriculum and the in-classroom curriculum. And I think the places that we really want to look to are these states, districts and states that have committed to funding. So you can take a look at Tennessee that's put tutoring into their funding formula. The governor's proposed a budget in Michigan that includes $150 million for tutoring. Florida has a proposed bill that would support tutoring. So I think there are districts that are doing some interesting things with the funds that they have right now, but there's really this potential, I think, for states to come in too, to really add in the funds for tutoring.
So just a few things to share. I feel like you could have kept going for an hour, but I want to pull in another question from our audience, which I think is really a question for Katie, which is about how do you sort of deal with some of this bureaucracy around work study, around perhaps universities' preference for on-campus work study jobs as opposed to through outside organizations? Like, how are you approaching this journey? I know it's been a bit of a journey.
It's a journey. I think some of the big things, there was Biden's call to action to double the percent of funding earmarked for federal work study, and a lot of universities have signed on to that. And one of the things I think is at scale for this to be sustainable, I really do think that policy shifts are going to be required to, I feel like I've got a lot of long laundry list of dream lists, but I think that would really help simplify the process. And part of that might be, you know, vendors that are already approved, like high quality, high impact tutoring vendors, right? That are meeting the definition of the 7 characteristics that Dr. Loeb shared. Like there's different ways that we could already help like make the process simpler. But right now, all of the decision-making is really pushed down to the level of each individual university or higher education institution, right? Not only, you know, which students are have access to federal work study, but also like what percent they're willing to support of federal work study towards a total, like an hourly rate. They set the hourly rate. That hourly rate is different. They have their own different admissions timelines, right? There's many, many things that make a program like ours, where we recruit folks across 300 different campuses, difficult to maintain at scale. And again, I think ideally there would be some things that we could standardize for tutoring, right? Like a standardization for a minimum bar for hourly pay. All of those things would go a long way, I think, to help make tutoring more sustainable in the long run. And this is the thing that we're saying is where college kids, we would love for them to spend time doing this, right? For lots of reasons, but also, of course, let's bring more kids, let's bring more folks into education. So we're seeing all these different positive impacts of it. And I will say that is the challenge right now. That's what makes it very arduous. And I think some small, but yet very hard to get tweaks could make this more possible and easier to navigate if we are really rallied around ensuring this is something that endures beyond ESSER.
Yeah.
I think just one quick addition to that is I think there's so much potential in universities because there are lots of tutoring programs. There are lots of students want to do tutoring. They just haven't kind of pulled them into this high impact mode yet. And so I think there's a potential there. And then also with teacher preparation programs, there's a number of teacher preparation programs. Their first thing now that the teachers in training do is to do tutoring instead of just going in and observing. And so that combination of the teacher prep programs, the work study, this other tutoring that's going on, there's a really big source of tutors there that if we just could, as Katie was saying, adjust some of the rules a little bit, it would really kind of move it towards supporting high impact tutoring at a really big scale.
Yeah. Oh, Michael, I was actually just going to ask you, because I was going to say, I know that at least in the Great Oaks in New York City, that you guys get some of the fellows who are actually kind of doing their teacher residency through some of the local programs. But also, I was hoping you could just share a little bit about the ways that the tutoring fellowship at Go has become its own teacher pipeline for you all.
Yeah, so it's been a phenomenal source of talent. And I don't know, Zenovia, whether you have your eye on some of the tutors, and Katie, it's an explicit part, I think, of the Ignite program that they become sort of future members of TFA, but fully half of the teachers at Great Oaks, New York City, a school we've been at for over 10 years, are former tutors. And we have a partnership with NYU and with Relay and with some other higher ed partners to train and credential to do exactly what you were describing, Susanna, so that your teacher training isn't just sort of an observation, but you're actively engaged in ways that allow you to be successful and to add value to students. So this, I think, gets to, Liz, you mentioned this idea of elephants in the room. I think one of the big elephants in the room for us and perhaps others who are doing tutoring is where do you find these people? Where do you come up with the talent? How do you get the folks that you need? And Susanna, I think you were getting at a couple of sources and thinking about work study and thinking about current college students. But I saw in the chat, somebody asked a question about training parents. And I think that, when Matt Kraft co-authored his paper on scaling tutoring across the country a couple of years ago, he mentioned the problem of finding enough tutors to meet the demand. Where are we going to find all of these people? And that's definitely been a real struggle for us. Last year, we could not fill, honestly, all of the spots that we had funding for because we couldn't find the people qualified who we wanted to place in schools. So we fell short. This year, it looks like we're on track to meet our goal. of several hundred, where our goal is 335. I think, knock on wood, we'll get there. But the question in the chat was about training parents, and I think parents have a role to play and could be really a great resource, as well as sort of adults who are maybe career changers, who are thinking about leaving the rat race of whatever they're doing, if they're tired of the law or whatever, and want to get into teaching. This is a good way to put their foot in their toe in the water and find out if it truly is.
Yeah, I want to stay on this parent idea for a minute, because one of the things I wanted to ask about is, besides learning loss and ongoing challenges of just educating all kids, right? One of the big headlines right now in education is around chronic absenteeism, that we have many more students missing much more school than they were before COVID. And frankly, I think it's stumping a lot of us. I would put myself in that too, done this work for a very long time, and it's hard to understand what's going on. I'm wondering, Zenovia, you actually mentioned that you guys make sure to communicate with parents about the tutoring and when it's happening. I'm also just wondering, generally, do you see a role for tutoring in helping address chronic absenteeism around student engagement, motivation, or also just, hey, you're going to have tutoring today, like maybe you should show up to school?
Right. So with that part, we do have the parent on board, because we were like, you have to have your kid here to get this. This your kid needs it. You have to be here. And we send the reminders all the time. Make sure your kid is on this program, because again, if not, we're going to have to dismiss you, and no one wants to lose out on this. So these kids are here. You can see them logging on, and our attendance, I think last time we check in with the tutoring companies, our attendance was like at 90%. So they're here coming to campus to get on their programs and kind of engage with this. And we offer them incentives to, you finish your session, you've done a good job. And we're constantly looking at that data for attendance. Like, we check in every week to make sure our kids are on top of this. So again, it's improving our attendance. Our kids are engaged. Again, that's just one more adult that these kids are being held accountable to. And so again, that accountability is there. You have your parent, you have the teacher, you have myself, and now you have your tutor. So it's layers upon layers working together to make sure that our kids are getting what they need.
Michael, maybe you could talk a little bit about the explicit mentoring part of your model.
Yeah, I think that just building on what Zenovia said, our standard part of our program is our fellows call home on a regular basis, ideally weekly, to talk to parents about what's going on, to say, oh, Katie had a great week. She showed up every day. She was ready to work, and she made some real progress, or, she's struggling, whatever the report is. And that, I think, has a couple of benefits. One, parents love it. Two, it helps the tutor in the relationship with the kid they're serving to know that they have the bat phone to mom or grandma or whoever the caregiver is at home. I think that and then to deepen the understanding of the kid that they're serving, where they're coming from, and to truly meet their needs. Also on our team, we've got people who think explicitly about training our fellows on meeting the needs of our kids' social, emotional needs. And so that's a part of the support that we give to the fellows throughout the year of service that they render.
And Katie, I know that you guys are working on you've been piloting, I think, at one district, a curriculum around kind of engagement and executive functioning for 9th grade, I believe. Could you share a little bit more about how that kind of contributes to this idea of using tutoring to really build that kind of broader student engagement with school?
Absolutely. And I'll just say, when we designed Ignite, we really saw it as a talent delivery solution, where what adults or young people are working on with students, right? It could be a lot of things, right? So you could really put the content in there, as a way to make this an enduring way that, expands, to Susanna's point, the number of educators, the number of adults that students have relationship with. And we know that matters for lots of other reasons. So, so that was always like a vision for Ignite. And so thinking about that, one of our high school partners reached out to us the first year that we implemented Ignite and said, we want to bring this to our campus. And we were like, great. And we think that the model likely needs to look different for 9th graders or 10th graders. So let's co-design that with your students. So we were able to pay students to participate in a design sprint with us over the summer to help say what they wish that they had for 9th graders, because the school's big vision was 9th grade engagement. If they could get 9th graders on track by the end of 9th grade year, you know, the percent that they were more likely to be successful and pursue different post-secondary access was much greater, right? And so we designed a 9th grade engagement program with students who were saying, this is what I wished I had, this is what I wished I needed. And that program has seen a ton of success. It's individual, it is one-on-one. It is really focused on, you know, executive functioning. Kids told us what they wanted. They, of course, didn't use those words, but it is goal setting, understanding your strengths, connecting that to post-college options, right? So that's what we've been doing, and it's expanding to another district this year. We are partnering with ASU and tracking how this impacts absenteeism, right, is one piece of that we're looking explicitly at. And I would say anecdotally, we're also hearing that for our K-8 programming, right? Like, because of what we've named as like this consistent relationship, the access to personalized instruction, kids are feeling more excited to attend. I had one student who literally said to me, I hate Fridays, which as an adult, I love Fridays, right? So I was very surprised by this. And I was like, oh, tell me more. And he was like, Fridays is the only day I don't get to see my Ignite fellow. So I don't like him. And I was like, oh my gosh, but that to me is just like a smaller sign of like, again, the real relationships being formed, but also like they want to show up because they're excited to have another, you know, adult to connect with during the school day.
I'll just second that too. And what Zenovia said about seeing attendance boosts when there's tutoring, I think we've been seeing that nationally as well. One thing about tutoring that I just want to emphasize is it's like such a great mentoring opportunity because it's mentoring. You've got that kind of relationship, but you also have these kind of gains in learning to celebrate. And so you celebrate that learning as a student and as a tutor. It's very satisfying to both. And it leads to this sense that I'm a student. As the student in the tutoring, they see that they can be successful. And so they get so much of that benefit from mentoring that then having it linked with learning really connects it to the school and can have a kind of super positive effect beyond just the kind of good mentoring, feeling better in the moment. It is also in the long run can help you engage in school. So I think mentoring is kind of a big part of what high impact tutoring is.
And I have seen that at all of your various sites, and that's been really cool. I want to bring out another question from our audience, which maybe is for you, Susanna, but everyone should feel free to jump in, which is around like, are there tutoring curricula that are better than others, right? We have these 7 elements, but what about the actual materials, and how do we know, or how does a district or school know if the material the tutor is working with is good enough?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's so many different dimensions of a good program that it's hard for me. I can't tell you exactly which curriculum to use, but I think there are a few things to think about. One is if the school is using really high quality instructional materials, has a really good curriculum, then alignment to that is the perfect ideal. So you've got something really great going on in the classroom and you reflect it again in the tutoring. And so I think that is really the best. And there are these ways, Ed Reports and others, to figure out whether the tutoring curriculum is good the overall curriculum is a good curriculum. That said, I think that tutoring programs can be highly effective, even if they don't use the exact same curriculum that's in the classroom, as long as their curriculum is also really tied to standards, is really high quality. And so, there are ways of assessing that in a similar way that you would assess the school materials. So the best school is good, you do the same one. Second best is you do a really good curriculum, but it isn't aligned with the school because the school isn't doing necessarily using high quality instructional materials.
And if I can jump in really quick, I had an opportunity yesterday to do a virtual walkthrough with some of my online tutoring. And so when we came back to kind of brainstorm, and I was, talking to the company, and I was like, we need to look at this curriculum, and we want to make sure that they are aligned to what we're doing on campus. And so having those conversations with the company does help out. And so we kind of brainstormed, we did some troubleshooting, and then we just got right back on track. But just being in a presence inside those courses, if you can, you show your staff how to get in there and see what's going on, that's pretty much what we were doing yesterday, actually, with our online virtual tutors. So that was very impactful for me and my staff. Like, let's let them know what the kids need, what they're missing, so they can have that available to them. And so that's kind of what we did with that situation.
Sorry, I'm just reading these questions. That's great. Yeah, and I think I'd also just mention that I believe, the way Ector County's approaches is that teachers also have an option. They can choose to send materials directly to the tutor or the tutor company, but they don't have to. There's a lot of different levels of autonomy kind of built into so some teachers might feel like that's extra work and they don't want to, and they're happy with it. And some feel like, oh, and you can sometimes sort of get a sense of, oh, this teacher sends materials, and that's why all these kids are doing something that might look a little bit more similar. So I think that there's that part of it too. But I think the other takeaway, I guess, from what you just said, Zenovia, is just that you have to pay attention, right? Like, it is a program. You have to continue watching implementation. You need to have someone who's probably in charge of paying attention to all of these details throughout. And with that, I don't have a smooth transition, but we have 4 minutes left. So I'm going to move to our kind of final note, which is a question for everyone. And if you have more questions, by the way, that we didn't get to, or you still have that burning question, put it in the Q&A. We're going to go through some of these. We might post some answers online. So please continue sending in your questions. But here's my question. We're sitting here across the country in February 2024. Let's fast forward 10 years. Now it's 2034, which is definitely a sci-fi novel. But what is the role of high impact tutoring in America's schools 10 years from now? In other words, what is your greatest hope for tutoring if it lives up to the potential that we all see in it and that we are talking about right now?
I'll jump in.
Sorry, you go.
Well, I hope that it is one of those things that we say, we need this. It's right for kids. It's right for children. And just looking further, we're in the 21st century. Technology is it's here. It's not going anywhere. Kids need these skills anyway for when they enter the job force. So again, collaboration, learning, filling the gaps, this has to happen. And I'm hoping that 10 years from now that this will be sustainable and it will be afforded to every student, regardless of where he or she comes from or their zip code. So again, this is a successful program. So hopefully we'll have the funding, we'll have this incorporated into everything that we do.
Enrollment is dropping at public schools across the country and has been since the pandemic. And parents are voting with their feet because their kids are not getting from the traditional model of school what they need. And I think tutoring offers the opportunity. So Liz, to your question, 2034, I hope that tutoring is ensconced as a expectation that schools have to meet the needs of their kids, and every public school that a kid attends has this element of it.
I mean, that's truly my greatest hope, that it's enduring, right? That every kid has access, and that we as a group of adults have figured out a way to do that and to make that possible, so that it's just a part of the school day. Every kid has access to it. And honestly, I hope that it is bringing lift to educators who are working incredibly hard right now every day, and that we continue to find ways to plug in different ways that other adults can connect to support the diverse needs of all kids in classrooms.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel the same way. We know that it works, and we owe it to our students to embed it in schools for the long run. And I really think we can do it, and we can have new models of schools that are just more effective, more equitable, and really get the opportunities for students that we would like to see.
Well, I want to thank all of you so much for being on this panel. I feel like I could do an hour long with each of you. There's so much to learn from the work you're doing and the visions that you all have and that you're carrying out. It's been such a privilege to spend this time with you. To everyone still on, of which there's quite a few of you, we will be sending out some resources and the recording within the next day or so. And we're so grateful for those of you who spent time with us today. And, you know, I hope that we can reconvene in 10 years from now and just look at how far we've come, because that would be really fun. And it'll be great. So thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.